Hello, bonjour. Anin. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lara McKendrick. I'm an architect based here in Ottawa, and I'm also the Senior Vice President and Treasurer of the Ontario Association of Architects. On behalf of the OAA, I have the great pleasure of welcoming you to the SHIFT2025 Challenge celebration. And on behalf of my fellow Ottawans, if you're a guest in our city, I certainly hope you get a chance to go for a walk, a roll, or some sort of a meander to see either the tulips in bloom or get a look at least at one of the three rivers that converge here. The DiGiuseppe, the Ottawa, I'm going to try to get this right, the Tanagadino, Zibi, the Gatineau River, and the Pasapikigani, Zibi, the Rideau River. So the big river, the Cascades River, and that flows through Rocks rivers. These highways of the past made Ottawa an important, an important meeting place. As we begin tonight's event, I want to take this moment to acknowledge the land on which we are coming together. Ottawa and the surrounding watershed is the traditional unceded territories of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people, who have lived on and cared for this land for time immemorial. As the regulator of the practice of architecture in Ontario, the OAA honors the rich cultural and natural landscape that our buildings and spaces are part of, as well as the connection to the land Indigenous peoples have valued for millennia. The association is grateful for Indigenous knowledge that guides us. It commits to building in harmony with the land and creating sustainable places for generations to come. In the spirit of reconciliation, the OAA acknowledges its responsibility to address past and present injustices and provide space for traditional knowledge and worldviews to shape the architectural landscape of Turtle Island. The OAA's SHIFT Challenge is a biennial awards program that began in 2019. It's an aspirational ideas competition created to highlight the distinct contribution that architectural thinking brings to addressing key social issues. And SHIFT invites OAA members, intern architects, architecture students, and their collaborative teams to respond to an identified area of concern using their skills and insights. Past themes have included infrastructure, health, and resiliency. For this year's SHIFT 2025 challenge, we followed our own conference theme of reshaping communities. In February, a jury led by facilitator Diarmid Nash gathered at the OAA headquarters in Toronto to review about 40 in-depth submissions from teams led by students, interns, and retired members, architects both long-seasoned and newly licensed. This year's jury was, in alphabetical order, Dr. Elizabeth English, Erica Gomerato, Shane Laptiste, Jean-Philippe Larocque, and Janet Rosenberg. In fact, I think Janet, Diarmid, and Jean-Philippe are all here with us somewhere tonight in the audience. So please, a big thank you to our facilitator and jury. Now we are excited to share the 6 outstanding selections chosen by this jury and have you learn more about these ideas directly from the teams behind them. From urban renewal projects and reconceptualizing building materials to designs tailored for emergency response, these SHIFT selections focus on the critical need for adaptable and sustainable architectural approaches to challenges like climate change, housing crisis, and social shifts. By encouraging the architecture profession to re-examine and reimagine the built environment, SHIFT highlights the role of design in promoting stability and fostering a sense of belonging and building resilience. First, we will introduce each project separately to present the teams with their awards, and I'll be joined by the OAA's architecture graduate for 2024-2025, Alif Efe, to give me a hand. And then we'll have a bit of a fireside chat with questions from myself and hopefully from you, the audience, as well. So up first, we have Subdivillage by the Smart Density team, led by architects Misha, Bereznyak and Naama Blonder. Please join us on stage, Naama.
Subdivillage, which addresses low-density growth by redesigning suburban street networks in order to improve walkability, cycling, and local trips within the realities of low density, car reliance, and limited transit. Without raising costs or density, the concept creates livable communities ready for future transit and growth. Team led by architects Naama Blonder and Misha Bereznyak.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And this is on? Okay, perfect. And clicker, clicker, clicker. Okay, hi. Thank you so much for having me tonight. This number, 58%, represents how many single-family houses are built in percentage among all the new homes that we build, almost 2/3. And my company is called Smart Density, and what we preach for is that, to be honest, quite the opposite. We advocate for much more compact, livable. Me personally, live downtown in a condo, don't own a car, bike everywhere. But at some point we realized that probably people want something else if this is the stats that speak for itself. So, and this is what we build. Sprawl, low-rise residential neighborhoods. And because this is the OAA, we picked some of the best in Ontario, but this is pretty much how it looks like all across North America. And this is how it looks like at the ground. When I talk to people, they say they move to the suburbs because it's kid-friendly and green, which is not so much. Blocked with cars. Cars are very, very dominant. And this is how it looks like from, architecturally. Just look at the street section. Oversized, very, very wide, the walking experience, and even over time, our suburbs properties, have shrank because they also need to address density. So the qualities that we had in the original suburbs are no longer delivered in today's suburbs. And we ask ourselves, can we do better? Because I want to say that even those who like to drive, okay, I don't know how, but some people like to drive. I would say they appreciate walkability. And walkability is this very soft word that architects and urban planners use. And what does it actually mean? So for us, it means that it's pleasant to walk. If you think about it, a lot of our built environments are actually not that pleasant to walk. With that, we came up with the concept of Subdivillage, that is basically proposing, and we start with proposing new street typologies. Wait, I'll get to this here. We want to offer a menu of new streets. Yes, we will have the regular vehicle street, but we will also have streets that are more car light or completely car free in this new neighborhood design. And this is how it would look like. And if you think about it, even that what we call the green street doesn't exist in today's suburbs. So can we deliver this new quality? Here's a comparison of how our typical suburban layout looks out today, and our proposal in comparison, a way more efficient use of land, a simple grid that would utilize a better outcome. Because what we want to see here is that this is not the new urbanism type. You access this street and you park your car in the garage, but we believe that design can shape behavior. These streets tells you need to slow down. And yes, the streets are also very short, so you don't have to drive very slowly for too long. So what you would see here is, again, those the kind of orangey is the Mews street, where it's car light, and where you can see the little bike cyclist, it's the completely car free. So I think this was my last slide, yes. And I have 20 seconds. I just wanted to say, to thank the OAA, because this is our fourth, we actually, here on the SHIFT stage for the 4th time since the inception of this program. And I just wanted to thank Tamara and Eric and Sherry and everyone, because this is such a wonderful program for especially younger firms, or, you know, when we, let's put it that way, the design excellence program is without reach. And I can link the growth of the business and the success of the business directly to, you know, we're now having a building permit for the SHIFT Award that we won 2 years ago, and this was picked up by the Globe and Mail. And yes, picked up by the Globe and Mail, and last week we signed our 2nd contract already. So there's a direct correlation to the SHIFT, and so with that, I just wanted to thank you.
Our second project is, mic drop. Somewhere. The second project is the City Limits, rethinking a 100-year-old Toronto suburb with team lead Tim Scott accepting the award. Please come up, Tim.
The City Limits, rethinking a 100-year-old Toronto suburb, which envisions a sustainable future by integrating climate-focused design, quadrupling residential density, reclaiming streets as public spaces, and creating human-scaled, connected neighborhoods with carbon net zero strategies and cohesive urban living. Team led by architect Tim Scott.
I'm going to read this so that I can blast through it. Thank you, Lara. I stepped back from full-time work in 2022, as you can see, which has given me time to roam around. But I soon realized I was going to end up on the curb, shaking my fist at the parade of SUVs filling our streets. So I went back inside to do something more constructive, which has been to reimagine, what our 100-year-old neighborhood might be like if it were to be a place we'd like to stay. My neighborhood is comprised of 70 nearly identical blocks straddling the primary transit corridor of Yonge Street between Lawrence to the south and the old North Toronto City Limits site. It's a monoculture of modest single-family homes in single and semi-detached format, typical of many neighborhoods across Toronto and other cities in southern Ontario. And like all those neighborhoods, it's being rebuilt lot by lot. The new single-family houses are, like the homes they're replacing, all the same, with the exception that they are more than twice the size while accommodating, at most, the same number of people. This time around, the amenities are all private. The garage has moved to the front of the house, displacing the porch. The front yard landscaping has been largely replaced by paved parking stations. This curious distortion of the status quo is being realized by a development industry who knows its market is fearful of change, unless the change is to make things bigger. The scale of the new builds, plus the recent changes to the zoning bylaw allowing for laneway suites and 3 and 4 plexes without parking requirements as of right, suits my project perfectly. My objective is to quadruple the residential density within the general form and character of the existing neighborhood for all the pressing reasons: the need for housing, the need for the missing middle, the need for consolidated neighborhoods that are not car dependent. So I designed a simple 3-story threeplex in single and double lot formats, along with the laneway pavilion to be comfortably scaled and gracious. Remember, I'm doing all of this to make a place where we'd like to stay. Next, I chose a study block with a depth of 100 meters, typical to the neighborhood, providing sufficient room to add an east-west public lane. I replaced several properties with surface parking to accommodate the cars currently parked out on the adjacent streets. Mixed-use development will be allowed in corner lots. This proposed development will happen organically, lot by lot, in the same way it's currently being rebuilt. As a test, this site plan replaces the 14 existing new builds with 3 and 4 plexes and a number of associated laneway units, increasing the existing 59 homes by 2.5 times. And to reiterate, it's of equal importance to me that the streets and front yards are decolonized of cars to allow provision for pedestrian and cycling mobility while reestablishing a landscape streetscape. That's in good part because I also want to live in a human-scaled and civil community. I'm not preoccupied by what the new multi-unit residential buildings might look like. I hope lots of architects will be involved. I do care how they're made, which is to be designed to meet carbon net zero emissions and last 200 years. So who's going to take this on, make this happen, or even be interested? You'll have to look for my full submission to find out how that all works out. I began this project fascinated by the City of Toronto's carbon emissions website, which implores Torontonians to make 75% of their local trips up to 5 kilometers by means other than car if the city is to meet its carbon reduction targets. I find the idea that we all share an obligation to the health of an abstract 5-kilometer neighborhood very compelling. It has directly informed most of what I've done. Okay, let's cross Jedburgh to the Corner Cafe. Here, we'll be reminded of how important having a variety of third places is to a community. Without them, there's no place for neighbors to discuss the issues of the day, let alone plan a revolution. Thank you.
The third project is called Swansea Park, a development concept for the former Swansea Mews. Accepting the award is team lead and architect David Peterson, along with Avery Peterson and Eunice Leung.
Swansea Park, a development concept for the former Swansea Mews, which imagines blending nature and urban living through a central naturalized park, doubling housing density with modular mid-rise buildings, and fostering biodiversity alongside vibrant public spaces for community engagement. Team led by architect David Peterson.
So to begin with, I'll take you through our site location. So that blue line that's kind of faint to your view is our site. It's a Toronto Community Housing Authority site. It's home to 154 rent-geared to income units. The site is kind of slated for demolition because there's been a structural failure. The site belongs to this neighborhood, Swansea, that has been called by the City of Toronto a significant ecological kind of area. And you can see why. Off to the right is the Humber River Marshes, which is kind of west of the site. And it's home to like all kinds of biodiversity. And similarly is true in Hyde Park off to the east. You can kind of see the city beyond. And throughout the neighborhood, what we find is the topography is not made flat. There's all these kinds of ravines that run kind of north-south through the lot or through the neighborhood that is also kind of helping increase biodiversity. The south of the site is quite a bit different. We see regional roads, regional rail lines, and densities that kind of belong to kind of more like 5 and 6 times density, where the rest of the neighborhood is primarily like 1 times density and virtually kind of low rise. So that's the context. Our proposal, which I won't spend a lot of time talking about, you can scan the QRL code. The SHIFT team has done a great job of kind of discussing it. You've got booklets. So, because there's other things I want to talk to you about other than just the design. But I'll say this about it, that what we did was we looked at some historical maps and discovered that, in fact, there was this pond that was below the existing Swansea Mews site, a really high water table. That meant when they made the Mews that they placed the cars above ground. So part of what we did as an initial idea was to restore the pond and then create this central landscape that would encourage biodiversity. And we wrapped the buildings around this kind of crescent-shaped road and thinking of the buildings as kind of modular. And then at the edge of the development is the arterial road where we create a public porch that can host all kinds of amenities and becomes a threshold to a pedestrian kind of thoroughfare in this crescent road. And vehicles have access to the buildings, but they're really intended to kind of be a secondary means for moving through the site, kind of single lane, one-way road. Not feasible. This is really what I want to talk about, right? Because all these great ideas, competitions that we have, and architects kind of congratulate themselves and are really worth discussing. But then we get frustrated when we gather together as architects and talk about other parts of the world where we see these things happening, and we're left to ask, why doesn't it happen here often enough? And I think through my housing research, I've come up with some answers. Part of what we see elsewhere is not that they're better designers than we are. I think we can congratulate ourselves at being innovative that way, but they're also innovating in construction, they're innovating in governance, so how they procure projects, how they award projects, and then I would say, really importantly, I think they have more diversity of financial models for making housing. So this is part of, I think, a look at how we can become feasible with some things. The top left of the screen is the City of Toronto's initial development plan for the project site. So they're proposing something that's more like 5 to 6 times density. And you can see the numbers of units that they're looking at. 154 affordable units is what they had to replace. And we're looking at something that's still trying to think about diversity of socioeconomic diversity by looking at accommodating both low-income and middle-income units. And we do this through thinking about a different financial model. So something that takes a long-term approach to the development, where rather than where something's investment returns happen quickly, it's long-term thinking in an idea that is really not new, but an equity co-op that we could talk about more about, that allows for a larger pool of investors. I'll end with a project that we completed years back that was still very much based on this urban ecological idea, beginning with the courtyard and thinking about stormwater that was in cisterns that we brought to the surface inside the courtyard. And then the housing wraps around it. And when a pigeon shows up, you know you've got an urban environment. Thank you for attending and thank you for listening. That's my time.
Thank you, David. Our fourth SHIFT project is Parkdale Commons, a living food bank. Architects Nancy Chao and Luke Johnston of Lloyd London Architects. Please join us on stage.
Parkdale Commons, a living food bank, which transforms Toronto's Parkdale Community Food Bank into an adaptive space, fostering resilience, food security, and sustainable connections through thoughtful architecture, evolving with diverse neighborhood needs, and strengthening community empowerment. Team led by architects Luke Johnston and Nancy Chao.
We started work with the Parkdale Food Bank in the last year when they purchased their new house building on 5 Brock in Parkdale community. Both of us lived in Parkdale, and we were kind of well aware of some of the issues they were facing: gentrification, wage disparity, high rent, and of course food security. It was a significant purchase for the Parkdale Food Bank, because they'd been operating out of 2 different locations and trying to run things. Like many food banks across Canada, we quickly realized that they were doubling at an exponential rate, more clients, and when they got this project, we started to think, what happens in 5, 10, 20 years? Our meetings with Parkdale just really opened our eyes to how an operation like this works. And I think, we realized that while we donate our food and then they distribute it, a lot of what they do is take in money and purchase food. This leaves them vulnerable to kind of global impacts affecting food prices and local impacts too, such as bread price fixing. Other issues, they had long lineups in inclement weather, no public washrooms, a lack of kids areas, and a lack of space for community outreach. What we realize is that the food bank isn't about this exchange of food, although it is, but it is also a community hub or a commons for people to gather, socialize, and organize. So we approached this project and this competition to free ourselves from kind of an economic restraint. We said, what could we do? And I think what we did is we crafted these kind of adaptive reuse interventions that look to aid both the food bank and of course the community at large. So what you see here is the existing building, a turn-of-the-century warehouse. This houses their, what they call the store, their warehouse and offices. At the front, we envisioned a restaurant. It's currently a restaurant right now, but we thought of it as an incubator space for up-and-coming chefs, featuring local produce. 11 Brock Community House, which is directly north of them, we looked at having a symbiotic relationship between the building systems, mechanical systems, but also the inhabitants of those 2 buildings, so expanding their communal space. On the second floor of the property, we quite simply put in a washroom and shower that's available 24/7. Adjacent to that, we thought of a conservatory, so a community gardens, a gathering space that could also act as shelter for inclement weather. And finally, we have the silo, which we thought of as a CLT tower, a kind of a beacon in the community dedicated for food production.
All right, so for the plans, at the top of the page there, you can see the ground floor plan. Starting on the right-hand side is that grocery store, and then next to that is the warehouse, followed by the volunteer staff area, and then we have our community restaurant on the left, which is the west side facing Brock Street. The center plan is showing the second floor plan, so central to the space is the conservatory, and then to the left of that is the shower washrooms building, and then we have our vertical greenhouse just on the right-hand side. And then the last plan just in the corner is just showing how our building is starting to extend to our neighbors. So this section, you can see our multi-level garden, and on that second level, we're starting to expand our footprint towards our neighbor, just creating a new interconnected communal space. We've also enclosed 11 Brock's mechanical room, so it's just this idea about capturing and recycling waste heat to support our greenhouse. And again, this section is just illustrating that same idea about the energy heat recovery, and so just speaking about sustainability and resource efficiency. And then our section, this is our section through the whole building looking north. So we had an idea that the conservatory and the silos would have operable walls to open up the space. The conservatory also doubles as a shelter, so we were saying that the clients, they usually wait in line outside, so this would help protect them from inclement weather conditions. And you can also see how that silo connects to the stores below. And so it's just bringing together both that food distribution and production all in one location. And finally, our last slide here, you can see that vertical greenhouse is really a beacon to the neighborhood. Our design was really inspired by these like old concrete silos that we had visited many years ago, but we wanted to modernize it and use more sustainable features and materials. And then the conservatory and the washrooms, we wanted to contrast against the existing buildings. So they're a lot more amorphous and inclusive kind of in their shape and materiality. So our project really isn't about reforming food insecurity in Toronto, but we just wanted, it's a response basically by creating infrastructure that can withstand and adapt to Parkdale's evolving community dynamics.
Thank you, Nancy and Luke. That was really interesting. The next project is the Living Core, Designing for Resiliency at Home by the Q4 Architects team led by David I was going to stutter on this one, DiGiuseppe. I'm sorry. It's tricky Italian. Accepting the award is, I gotta say it again, David DiGiuseppe. I'm embarrassed. Francis, Cameron Mackay, Melissa Favas, and Marcello Grassa.
The Living Core, Designing for Resiliency at Home, which reimagines housing with a tornado-resilient design, integrating cost-effective rebuilding and essential functions to protect small-town Ontario's economic and cultural fabric while fostering adaptable, secure, and sustainable living spaces. Team led by architect David DiGiuseppe.
Hi, everyone. My name is David DiGiuseppe. I'm an associate at Q4 Architects in Toronto, and we like to say that we specialize in residential design, but also the small commercial and institutional buildings that make our communities great places to live. So our project, The Living Core, Designing for Resiliency at Home, the premise is all in the name, and we feel that the Living Core embodies the key elements of SHIFT, which is building resiliency in the face of radical change. So we've designed our project both for building resiliency against weather-related changes, but also building resiliency into the fabric of our communities and ensuring economic and generational resiliency to keep towns, small Ontario towns, viable places to live. This becomes all the more important in a housing crisis where keeping families in homes and communities for generations lessens the pressure on our major urban centers through potential displacement. So we wanted to use the SHIFT Challenge to change the focus of our discussion on housing challenges in Ontario. Particularly when we consider climate change and shortfalls in the residential sector. The conversation invariably is about cities, and particularly Toronto or Ottawa, for example. So we challenge this notion through our proposal to look at the smaller towns and communities that define the architecture and the whimsical vernacular of our province. And in the case of our proposal, we looked at Goderich, Ontario, which is a small town on the southeastern shore of Lake Huron. Goderich has been known for its charming design and sense of community and place and value, and it's a postcard of an Ontario town. All of this, however, was turned upside down when a tornado tore through the historical center on August 21st, 2011. You can see the path here of the tornado, and it's almost like the town was a target, and the resulting destruction formed the premise of our project to rethink housing in smaller communities around Ontario, and in ultimately enhancing their viability by increasing their ability to withstand and recover from extreme weather events. You can see that over 60% of the homes are single-family detached in Goderich, and 21% are small or mid-rise apartments. And so this needed to be studied in order to really look into the essence or the vernacular of the community, and so that our solution could actually reflect the true nature. In addition, Goderich reinforced the idea that our picturesque towns, which are often waterfront communities in Ontario, and they're particularly in danger of climate-related events. So our idea is quite simple. It's to divide the house into two defining elements: the core, which is a fortified and protected engine of the home, a solid bunker-like that provides protection for high-cost possessions, appliances, and building systems, and then the shell, which provides additional living and individual spaces, but in the context of a disaster or an acceptable loss. The core is rigid and heavy and could be mass-produced and replicable. It centralizes the house's services and provides points of connection for the shell. The shell, on the other hand, is lightweight, less cost-intensive, wood-framed, and easily modified or customized to capture the vernacular character of the place it's built. The core allows for safe sheltering in place. While you know that some of your property may be damaged, there's still a livable platform for rebuilding. So we don't lose sight of what constitutes a home, and so all of the expected amenities of a detached typology are there and divided into essential and non-essential spaces. During normal conditions, the integration of these two elements is seamless. So in the event of an emergency, we have to reconfigure and create space by putting our possessions away and protect the assets of the home that are key to rebuilding. And in a suburban or rural context such as this, that often is a car. You can see more about the proposal in the presentation booklet and on the website. And so we also looked at more multifamily typologies, and in this case, townhomes, which form a lot of the housing stock in these communities in Ontario. Also, while studying the collective form of the core and shell townhouse, we came to the realization that in the event of disaster, the core actually switches its orientation and creates a more protective environment at the back of the house for rebuilding and connecting with the neighborhood. And this called to mind the evocative image of an Amish barn raising, which has context in southern Ontario, but also illustrates the power of collective action to respond. So at the end of the day, our proposal for the core house is still a place to live, and we wanted to be able to capture that and present itself as a home, and not a case where the inhabitants are always reminded of the potential for a disaster, but that they have a sense of assurance and insurance in that case. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And the sixth and final project is Speculative Assemblies, From Pine Needles to Pressed Coffee, submitted by a team of students from Carleton University's Azrieli School of Architecture and Urbanism, led by architect and assistant professor Jerry Hacker. Please join us on stage, Jerry.
Speculative Assemblies, From Pine Needles to Pressed Coffee, which conceives a sustainable future by reimagining building practices, eliminating plastics, toxins, and exploitative supply chains through regenerative, biodegradable materials that promote biodiversity, human health, and environmental renewal while addressing urgent climate and ecological emergencies. Team led by architect Jerry Hacker.
Okay, one more. Is everyone ready for one more? So on the one hand, natural building materials obviously have been used for thousands of years by vernacular settlements and indigenous cultures and these kinds of things. But following the 2 world wars, something interesting happened in the chemical processing world. And this byproduct here, styrene monomer, this clear liquid that was a part of petrochemical processing, became super important to that particular industry, and they began looking for uses and found a particularly lucrative area for its use in plastics. And in just 75 short years, plastic has gone from 50 million tons, from 2 million tons to 450 million tons. And where there's plastic, chemicals of concern come along for the ride, so to speak. And the building and construction industry now accounts for 21% of that plastic use. It's second only to packaging, which is kind of crazy. So membranes, cladding, insulations, finishes, adhesives, piping. These now touch nearly every part of our sort of North American construction. And we now drink water that sits all day in plastic piping. We spray plastic into buildings that require gas masks and full hazmat suits to install. We put plastics next to soil in the ground, all under the guise of sort of sustainable initiatives. And those plastics do not degrade, possibly forever, but instead they slowly shed themselves into the environment as microplastics. And these have been found in our blood, in the placentas of babies, and even in brain tumors. So they pass the blood-brain barrier in our body, and they're finding their way into everything. And so this led to the question, what if you could plant a building? What would that really mean? And at the end, if you had to start thinking about that, what would that really mean in terms of the creation of the building? And would the end of that building really be any different from the start? And from there, this research into cold weather speculative assemblies was born. It begins by stating that buildings and assemblies should have come apart much, much easier than they do now. It mandates that we should stop putting toxic stuff in our buildings. It posits whether it's possible for a contemporary building to fully return itself to the earth. And finally, it places priority on buildings and assemblies being made of regenerative resources and participating more wholly in regenerative cycles. And so the examples of this that were undertaken as part of this research, Big Thick Cob is an investigation into thick self-regulating walls of the past, rather than subscribing to the layered wall approach of contemporary construction, where a series of singular materials designed for a singular purpose are stacked and layered together. Cobb proposes a thick assembly that's simultaneously the insulation, the cladding, the moisture control, and the aesthetic finish. The assembly breathes and regulates temperature without petrochemically derived membranes, and looks to sort of get away from those kinds of materials that are prone to failure at many points in the construction process. In cattails, hip waders were donned in order to first harvest a fast-growing regenerative local resource, namely cattails, transforming it into wall insulation with an R value of 40. From here, a wood stud wall and wood cladding has been redesigned to avoid the use of metal mechanical fasteners, assuring it will biodegrade into a nutrient-rich compost that can help with the next set of building materials. Bees and bioplastic, it deploys extensive research into beeswax and bioplastics for moisture barriers and exterior cladding. Of particular importance here is the attempt to find naturally occurring alternatives to those petrochemically based barriers that we're so familiar with, all of the SBS membranes and all of the wonderful things that we put on now, Tyvek and all these kind of things too. Pine and feather finds new uses for readily abundant naturally occurring materials such as chicken feathers, oddly enough, a resource that we currently dispose 240 million pounds of a year. And so using beeswax and soy wax to sort of neutralize dander and prevent decomposition, it looks for a way to come up with new insulations. Pine needles and pine resin as well, routinely left unharvested during the processing of lumber. are used here to create translucent interior wall panels that also act as effective air and vapor retarders. Straw bale obviously has been in use for centuries. It's never yet quite become sort of mainstream though, and even though we have so much of it here in Canada and it's very abundant, still sort of left to the fringes of the industry, partly because dealing with fire and pests and moisture are all these kind of critical things to deal with straw bale. So here, trying to look at strategic additives such as clay plasters and different kinds of things to allow these materials to be used more readily. Obviously, there's regulatory issues as well. A bit corny. This one is fun. It tests the limits of a single material. Corn is arguably the most common and domesticated industrialized crop in the world. It's in everything. If you look in the food chain, corn syrup to everywhere. That means there's abundant excesses from the crop that might be a regenerative resource for the industry. And corn explores this. It deploys an all-corn solution, stock subfloors, ceilings, popcorn insulation, which is also being researched by a German architect as well, husk paper, cob wall, and corn-based adhesives. Here, our propensity for morning coffee means there are 6 million tons of coffee waste produced every day worldwide. To explore the potential of this byproduct, clay, coffee, and potato starch were combined to create the raw materials for a coffee-based brick cladding. Bound together with a lime-based mortar, and due to its low conductivity values and these kinds of things, it was also compressed into panels and used for interior insulations and also exterior insulations in this kind of assembly. Ram It Up explores how much cement can be removed from rammed earth and how intentional erosion control mechanisms need to be introduced to this technology in the Canadian climate. So an insulating layer here of cob bage is sandwiched between a sacrificial and structural layer of rammed earth. And truss lime mortar checks are designed to slow the erosion process over time. And finally, Treehouse at the bottom there harvests a single fallen log and strives for an adhesive-free, metal mechanical fastener-free insulated assembly with reversible joints and all wood finishes, including unstripped bark cladding. So thank you very much, and let's go Jets. Little Manitoba plug there. Okay.
Thank you, Jerry. Go Jets. I'm not even a hockey fan. It's good. All right, so now that we've heard a little bit about these ideas, let's explore some of these themes a bit more. So I'm asking our other 5 team members, team leaders, to join Jerry on stage for a short round table discussion. And I've come up with a few questions, and then we'll also throw to the audience for questions as well. And we have some volunteers with microphones in the crowd, and you can raise your hand and let them know if you'd like to ask something. Okay. Any volunteers to go first? Just kidding. I'm gonna pick somebody out of the crowd. So to start us off, as we just heard from the speculative assemblies, Jerry, your team explored the use of unconventional and repurposed materials. Could you share more about the process behind sourcing these materials and discuss the potential to transform construction in the long term?
Is this on? It is on. Good. Sure, I can try to do that. I think it's really tricky, actually. And if we look sort of across the pond, so to speak, I think they're doing a much better job of this. Locally finding regenerative resource bases in local areas. I think they're doing a better job of kind of researching what's locally available, how far can it go, how do we get it, how do we grow it, what's here. And so in Canada, sort of trying to build that base first too, I think is important, because if this is about locally sourced stuff, kind of understanding what is the resource base we have within the place where we live, instead of this stuff, we're shipping, a tile from across the ocean and all these kinds of things, right? So it is this kind of challenge first to understand what we have and what can be hosted and how far it can go and how many spots we can have it in Canada. So there's that side of it, and then just from the student's perspective too, there's just the like hauling this stuff all around once you get it and using it and working with it and understanding all of the different processes. So it's a super complex problem, I think, but worth sort of diving into to see how we can wean ourselves off plastics and fossil fuels.
Awesome. Thanks, Jerry. Okay, and I'm going to pitch it over to Nancy and Luke, if you want to do the question about how the green spaces and ecological considerations are central in the project, and what role do you see architecture playing in bridging the urban living with environmental stewardship?
Yeah, I think architects obviously should play a big role in developing and fostering more green spaces in the city. When we were developing this project, the parkettes came to mind that scatter throughout Toronto, these tiny little parkettes, and they become very important green spaces for a number of different people. So when we were developing this rooftop idea, certainly we thought about that, but making it better, enclosing those spaces. The silo, the food production aspect of it, I think goes back to an idea of community gardens. In an ideal world, it would be lovely if the community could have a say in what's being produced and then distributed through the food banks. So it's tough in a very urban setting like Toronto to get those green spaces. So I think it's critical that we look at it. Yeah.
And David, you envision a more integrated approach, and maybe you can talk to this question too.
Yeah, for me, it was really an idea about when we make developments, how do we make sure that we're increasing habitat for all the kinds of creatures we want around us. The City of Toronto has bird-friendly guidelines, which is really there to reduce bird mortality, but really it's not increasing bird habitat. So, when we think about all the kinds of things that exist around us, are we making new developments that speak to that? Like for the example that I showed you from the City of Toronto, that's their proposal, they're thinking about densities that are so high and possibly building massing that will send shadows across ponds and into High Park. And does that kind of raise questions? Are they even consulting their own departments that would call this area ecologically sensitive, or significant, I should say? Do they talk even? There's a whole sustainability department for the City of Toronto. Do they talk when they're making these initial development plans? And that's part of what we wanted to do, is kind of have this as a part of how we initially conceive of places and ask questions about density, but also about future urban environments that are biodiverse.
Thank you. Anybody? Ferris Bueller? No, just kidding. All right, moving on. So, Naama, for projects like the Subdivillage, reimagining existing urban layouts is a central theme, obviously. And what were some of the biggest challenges your teams faced in proposing significant changes to establishing the neighborhood structures? And how would you theoretically address community pushback or skepticism? And how would you work with municipalities to gain support for the unconventional approach?
So I think the greatest challenge was for me personally to say is that's what we want to bring forward, as I explained, to the things that we advocate for the day in and day out. So in terms of existing communities, these are clearly new subdivisions, and that's why we wanted to address such a hardcore topic that we see as problematic. But you asked something very interesting about the municipalities, and there is a very big challenge coming to the municipality and say, work with us. We want to do something that works against your transportation street guidelines, because usually we have these oversized streets because Most of the time, the transportation department says, okay, we need 6 lanes here, 2 parking lane, daylight triangle, and then you end up with 36 meters right of way before you even notice. So working with the municipalities, bringing a vision that gets them really excited, it's a big part of how you need to convince them, and that is very challenging.
And I know you have some experience with that. With your recent project in the core. Excellent. And okay, so I'm going to pass this one over to the other David DiGiuseppe. And with the Living Core, your project introduces the disaster resilient design. And how do you balance the need for robust and safety-focused features with creating spaces that feel welcoming and maintain a sense of normalcy through the crisis for the residents? And why do you think this maybe isn't happening already?
I think that the balance is hard, obviously. People, our houses are our lives, and also the biggest financial purchase we make in our lives. And so allocating certain areas to be destroyed is obviously problematic and difficult. I think we focused on what we felt were necessary spaces, and what we felt were spaces that could be moved in a disaster, often a time where people are brought together. So you can make the sacrifice of living in the same room as your family members in the case of disaster. I think that this isn't common in Southern Ontario because these real disastrous effects of climate change are relatively recent, but also increasing in commonality here. We know that there are essentially uninsurable places in North America. We just had the fires in LA and flooding in Florida where people can't get home insurance. So I think that hopefully it won't happen, but as more climate issues occur, it's going to become a lived reality of people that we're going to have to adapt our houses in better ways.
Thanks, David. All right, I know we have a question over here at the back.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's actually been very interesting hearing from all of you this evening. But I want to sort of touch on a couple of what you've said right now, and what you've been showing us about the street life in our urban cities, in Ottawa in particular, and I bet Toronto is also suffering from this. The tree canopy is disappearing because of the way that the city is allowing the development of multi-unit housing in existing neighborhoods. So the densification is destroying the tree canopy because they aren't pushing. They may be saying a lot in their guidelines that, oh yes, we're going to preserve trees and insist that there's trees. The reality is they're not being planted. The trees canopy is disappearing, and with that, some of the wildlife, the birds, the habitat is disappearing. How do we as architects try and get the city to reverse course? We need the densification, but how do we get them to actually enforce or get developers to provide that natural environment that is disappearing?
Anybody want to do that one? How about David?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I mean, part of what can happen, what should happen, is that our many municipalities already have rules in place that they ignore. Tree bylaws that take second place to density, kind of concerns, and they become things that are approved as variances, when truly speaking, we just have to prioritize things and say, if your development approach doesn't allow you to keep that old growth tree, then find a new development approach. go back to the table and kind of rethink what you're doing. In my practice, we often encounter landscapes, and I can tell you we start off with a landscape and ask questions about how can we preserve trees or kind of make decisions around this, understanding that, you know, most often we're dealing with for-profit situations, and there are other solutions. It does take more time, it does take more effort on everyone's part, and it does take communities, I think, speaking up and advocating for some of these things, like I say, that already exist as bylaws. Understanding that there are bylaws that look at sustainability, but they fall lower in that hierarchy of what's important. We can shift that.
Thanks, David. And I want to ask a question of Tim, because we haven't asked him anything. So Tim, SHIFT is the ideas competition rather than a built one. How feasible do you think your idea is, and what steps can you take to pursue it further?
Sorry, repeat the very last.
How feasible is it, and what steps would you take to pursue your idea further?
Well, I think the feasibility of it is, I hope I sort of illustrated in that the built form of the neighborhood, of our neighborhood, is transforming, and it's transforming inadvertently towards a typology that I think would be an improvement. You know, that there would be multiple residential units inside the same building envelope as is currently simply replacing an earlier house. So the thing I didn't attempt to talk about, because there wasn't reasonably time, is that there's a huge embodied wealth in that old neighborhood. The houses were bought for a couple of $100,000. Families were raised. People got old, and now take their chips and leave. You know, and that wealth could be reconceived as having a huge equity component where citizens begin to see themselves as developers, not people who leave. And I think it would provoke a lot of, for me, it's provoking a lot of interesting conversations with my peers and my colleagues to talk about and think about how to take that equity and confront the people who have it, and challenge through a variety of institutions, I think, ways of proceeding back into the neighborhood to realize the thing that is simple and not special, but needed.
Awesome, thank you. All right, I'm getting the signal for time, so I hope you've enjoyed the SHIFT presentations and get a chance to pick up one of our collector's books that examine the projects in greater detail. Throughout the year, the OA will come back to these SHIFT selections and hold other special events to explore them all in more detail. Keep your eye out for future news on the OA website or in the OA newsletters. And again, please join me once again for congratulating all the tonight's recipients. Thank you, merci, miigwech. I hope many of you have tickets to join us tonight directly after this event for the Archifete taking place at the Canadian Museum of Nature. There will be shuttle buses going between the venue and the Westin here, and I'll see you there soon and enjoy the rest of your evening.